Hi there and welcome to Bike File with me, Wazza. This week you join me at a beautifully sunny Donnington Park where I will be enjoying Triumph's new Daytona 955i. Also in the show, Louise will be riding one of these and Rod will be riding one of these. What a lovely, big, shiny, sporty bike this is. Or is it? Let's take a closer look. Well, the lines are good and sporty, nice and sleek. There's a teeny little digital dash nestled up in that nose cone, marking it out as a child of the modern sporting era. And the bark off that end cam when you give it the berries is really pretty sound. So far so good, I'd say. Let's get on. Feels pretty light, 188 kilos I think you'll find. And the riding position tucks you in better than your mum used to, without being too cramped. There's even a pillion seat there too. So far, so good. What about the thick and clunky bodywork that in its single-tone silver paint job may be a bit shiny, but still looks slightly dowdy and a little bit budget? And then there's the fact that if you have a look behind the fairing panels, you're bound to find an extra long nut or a wire hanging out here and there. Or perhaps if you take a look at the swing arm, which really looks like it's just come out of a GCSE metalwork room, I ask you. You do the patriotic thing, you buy British and you get yourself a Triumph. And you will get a very good dose of individuality and also plenty of character. In the case of the Daytona 955, that'll also get you some good solid handling and performance too. Only thing is, you also get a bike that just isn't quite as slickly finished as any of its Japanese competitors. It's just one of those Triumph things. They're a little more English rose than Oriental catwalk weight, that's all. Something else you get with any Triumph is also a seemingly endless stream of old gentlemen intent on boring you into early retirement with lengthy tales of their Triumphs they had as youths. Quite why once owning a bike with the same badge on the tank gives them the right to do this is beyond me, but rabbit on they will. To start with, you'll find this all rather enchanting as you enjoy taking your place in this historic British dynasty. But when the 10th old fella in as many rideouts comes along, you'll understand where I'm coming from. But enough of me and the Triumph already, because now it's time to go and see what Louise is up to.
Now, if you haven't heard of Italjet Dragster, you're either not interested in scoots or you've been living in the rainforests of Burma for the last couple of years. When this little bike was released, the world's bike press welcomed it with open arms. Its striking, brash looks, its exposed trellis frame gave an overall appearance of this powered two-wheeler landing from Mars. Succeeding where Aprilia's Area 51 failed, the Dragster has become a classic almost from the off. With its cross of cutting-edge scooter styling and a trellis frame any Ducati will be proud of, the Dragster successfully bridges the gap between the pure scooter market and the real-world biking scene. Now, as with many Italian scooters these days, the Dragster makes use of Piaggio's 125cc leader engine. You can see speeds of up to 65 miles per hour appear on that trendy dash. The look is minimalist, although the weight of the machine doesn't really reflect this. Up-centre steering is another gadget adding to the Dragster's list, but impressive as it looks, it adds more to the overall weight of the machine. You know, the look of this bike is to the scooter world what the MV Agusta F4 is to the world of superbikes. It's one of the few scoots that can quite happily sit in a garage next to a 916 and not look ugly. We love the styling, but there's one thing they've missed. Looking at this bike, you may think you can see a pillion seat, but you'd be wrong. In its place, you'll find a useless plastic pad, which should really only be used in emergencies. Through town, the ride is easy and fun, making short work of urban filtering. Out on the A-roads though, this is a different story. The bike weaves a little when nearing its top speed, and anything more than a breeze makes it a bit of a handful. And for performance, 8 out of 10. With its proven 125cc leader engine, the Dragster doesn't fail to impress. Disc brakes front and back, and you can see and feel the quality. As for the comfort factor, A measly 6 out of 10, I'm afraid. You really wouldn't want to go much further than the local shops with a seat like this. And if you're taking a pillion, oh dear, forget about it. Although they do have foot pegs, the thickness of that seat, well, it isn't much thicker than a few pages of A4, and you might have to take them to casualty with a broken bottom. Like many of the Italian scooter producers, the quality of their UK destined bikes is getting better and better. Italjet have a long and checkered history in relation to their build quality, but they've promised us that things are going to improve, and for now, I reckon this deserves 7 out of 10. Value for money? Well, for around £2,300, it seems a fair price for the amount of bike you get. It's just sadly let down by the lack of insurance deals at the moment. So I reckon 8 out of 10. It's sexy, it's distinctive, and it certainly turns heads. And as for street cred, this wicked looking scoot earns itself 9.5. And the only reason we couldn't give it 10 out of 10 is because it isn't Judgment Day and there's the possibility of something better coming along the horizon soon. But for now, this is the bid.
Dragster 125, plenty of bikes competing against it in the marketplace. I'm not convinced about having a V-twin 4-stroke 125. I'm not convinced it's going to be quick enough. 4-stroke's definitely the way to go, but maybe not in that format. Having said that, it is a custom cruiser bike. Probably does its job very, very well, but not really my scene.
The Dragster, yeah, it's the styling of it. It's you can always have a conversation about it with your mates down the pub. I'm not really a scooter man myself, and if I was to go for one, I think I'd go for a classic Lambretta. But if you're after that sort of thing, then good bike.
Welcome back to the Triumph Daytona here at Donnington Park. Now the first thing you'll notice if you ride one of these is the motor. It's laid out in Triumph's trademark 3-cylinder triple formation. And this means you've got a lovely combination between the low-down thrusting drive of a V-twin and the high revving drive of some, 4-cylinder like a GSXR 750. And on the boil, one of these bikes sounds about as distinctive as any Ducati you could care to mention. With 137 brake horse at the back wheel, the big Daytona's no slouch. Wind on the throttle, you've got a good initial drive that builds up into a very healthy mid-range. There's even a little bit of top end to play with as well. But just beware, you'll have to keep an eye on the rev counter as you get used to this bike, because like all Triumphs, the rev limiter feels a few hundred RPM too early and will cut the party dead just when you think it's going to carry on a little bit. Once you get used to it, this is no problem at all. It's just another part of the Triumph experience. Start giving the motor some stick, and if you've a background on any other modern sports bike, you'll soon notice the gearbox. It's precise enough, but against the competition it is heavy going as you thud up and down through it. You'll soon get used to it, just needs a bit of a boot, that's all, especially if you're on the track and after some fast shifting. On the road, where everything happens that little more sedately, it's no bother. And that's it for part 1 of Bike File, but do join us in part 2 where we'll be hooking up with Rod, and I will be playing some more with Triumph's Daytona. Welcome back to part 2, and here we are again with the Triumph Daytona. Now so far we've been talking about the motor, the acceleration, things like that. So now would be as good a time as any to get on to stopping, because the brakes on this bike are just about its most outstanding feature. Quite simply, they're excellent. Until the new Fireblade came along this year, these were the best anchors on a sports bike ever. No ifs, ands or buts, they are one stunning set of stoppers. Enough power to pop your eyeballs out with a single-fingered stroke, if you'll pardon the expression, and all done with more feel than a night in an Amsterdam brothel. But don't let the Triumph's brakes lull you into a false sense of security at the track, because although they can haul the bike up double quick, you'd best have all your braking done before you want to turn in, because braking and turning in when you're hard on it is not a game the Triumph likes to play. The steeper headstock angle that makes this model turn more quickly than its predecessor acts against the Triumph here, as it allows even more of the bike's weight to be transferred over the front of the bike as you brake hard. Throw the Triumph's already slightly high centre of gravity into the mix and you end up with a very loaded front end that ain't turning fast until you let the anchors off. All this means is you need to ride methodically to get a fast lapper on this bike and get it braked and settled before turning in. It's probably a good thing that the Triumph needs riding like this, because although the steering's sharp enough, if you get into a turn a little bit hot, you're going to find it has a tendency to run wide. And if you really are champing on, you'll also find that the fairing will start to touch down, and that'll let you know quite plainly that enough is enough, sonny. All this is just a gentle reminder that this bike is not quite as sharply focused as the other bikes in the class, like the Fireblade and the GSX-R 1000. But then this is the way Triumph always pitched the 955. As a fast road bike that could handle good track riding rather than the other way round. Anyway, now it's time to go and see rodders.
Classic British bikes can be lots of fun, but how practical an option are they? If you want to own a classic Brit, you can either spend lots of money on something that's been carefully restored or become a mechanic yourself. Until now. This is a 1955 spec Royal Enfield Bullet, and you can buy one brand new. Back in the 50s, the Enfield Cycle Company of Redditch helped set up a factory in Madras to make bullet motorcycles for the Indian subcontinent. When the British industry fell on hard times, Royal Enfield went to the wall, struggling along until 1970 before finally locking the factory gates for good. The Madras factory was unaffected by the decline of its British parent, and in the late 80s a group of enterprising businessmen began to re-import bullets back into the UK, though early bikes suffered from poor build quality and reliability wasn't all it could have been. Now massive new investment and technical input from UK importers Watsonian has brought the bikes up to modern day standards. The Bullet comes with a choice of 350 or 500cc engines. This is a 500 option. Its single-cylinder pushrod engine developing a modest 22 brake horsepower, enough to propel the bike up to a claimed maximum speed of 75 miles an hour. Hardly a bandit beater, but that's not what the Royal Enfield experience is all about. The torquey, low-revving engine perfectly captures the essence of the classic era, and the 4-speed gearbox with its right foot change and kickstarter all adds to the package. The frame and cycle parts are utterly authentic too. The large, narrow 19-inch wheels and slow steering geometry contribute to the bike's vintage feel on the road. Drum brakes front and rear provide adequate stopping power, and the compact riding position is comfortable and secure. Period styling touches abound, from the cast headlamp nacelle with charming twin side lights to these classic shaped toolboxes big enough to carry waterproofs, a flask and sarnies. Some period design quirks are also evident. Royal Enfield's groundbreaking rear cush drive design effectively rubber mounts the rear brake to the rear wheel, which can feel slightly disconcerting on hill starts. The twin leading shoe front brake becomes a twin trailing shoe brake if you're going backwards, which means you can't depend on the front brake lever to hold the bike steady if you're facing uphill. Not usually too much of a problem, but it might just catch out the unwary. Watsonian have gone to a great deal of trouble to tailor the bike for the UK market, and this Clubman GT has received development work from none other than the legendary Norman Hyde. All Bullets now come with a 12-month warranty and full spares backup. An electric starter is now available as an option on the 500. Buy a Bullet and you're getting an authentic retro experience. A handmade bike that's almost identical to what your granddad might have bought brand new in 1955. So how does it rate? These bikes aren't fast. If you're riding the 350 version, be prepared to be overtaken by Citroën 2 Chevaux and more enterprising Honda 90 riders. The 500 option is much pokier and more able to keep pace with modern traffic. What power there is delivered so sweetly that the bike invokes huge grins from the rider, and you'll notice the sights, sounds and smells of the countryside as you plod through it, which many would say is the essence of classic biking. Brakes and cycle parts are adequate and the bike feels solid and dependable. Don't hurry the Bullet and it'll give you mile after mile of enjoyment. For comfort, 6 out of 10. With a Roadster, Cafe Racer and Trials version available, there's a riding position for everyone. This UK-made seat is very comfortable, and the handlebars and footrest position give a very relaxed ride. Build quality, 7 out of 10. Modern Bullets are hugely improved over earlier imports, and much final assembly now takes place in the UK. The Madras factory now uses updated tooling and machinery. It's worth remembering though that these bikes are manufactured in the third world, and some finish quality might not quite be what you'd expect from a Japanese bike. However, most owners want to lavish the attention on their Bullet to keep it looking smart. This is a bike that will reward TLC from its owner, but if neglected, could begin to look shabby. Value for money, 8 out of 10. With prices from only £2,485 for the basic 350 Bullet, rising to a shade under £4,000 for this top-of-the-range Clubman GT, it's hard to see how the Bullet can be anything other than a bargain. The Bullet appeals to a niche market, which will help keep depreciation low on well-cared-for machines. Street cred, 9 out of 10. In a world of retros, the Bullet is quite definitely the real thing. Have endless conversations outside supermarkets with old blokes who used to own one just like it. Entertain crowds of curious schoolboys with the starting procedure. Retros don't come any more real than this.
The Royal Enfield Bullet is great, and I'm glad they still produce it. Probably everything that was always wrong with the British bike industry encapsulated in one machine, but I'm glad it's still there. I'm glad that the traditionalist and the purist, if you like, can still buy that, complete with the option of whether or not to have a manufacturer's warranty, I believe. Great, glad it's still there.
The Enfield Bullet, it's nice to see someone still making it. It's an old classic bike, people are still interested in it. Not my sort of thing, but there are people out there for it, so yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, the Enfield Bullet, it's a good bike for all those budding Steve McQueens out there. They've been making the bike for the past 50 years, I think it is, so they must be onto a winner somewhere. Yeah, it's a great bike, retro styling, fantastic for a ride in the country on a Sunday afternoon, and it's the sort of bike you won't lose your licence on.
Welcome back to the Triumph Daytona, which, as we were saying earlier, was designed by Triumph as a fast road bike that can do track work rather than the other way round. So it's a shame that with this remit, this bike isn't more comfortable than it is. In town or on the motorway, you risk getting some grief, and that seat really ain't all that padded. But if you want to point this down your favourite back road, it'll take it apart with consummate accuracy, you'll have a good laugh on it, and as well as that, it's also rather nice and stable, because unlike stuff like Honda's Fireblade, this is one sports bike that don't slap. There's no doubt in this bike packs a lot more individuality than anything else this side of a Ducati, and is still a viable alternative in the litre bike sports class for those who'd rather ride fast their own way than try and go busting lap records at track days. And now it's conclusion time. So what do we think of this Triumph? Well, in terms of performance, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. She's plenty fast, as a genuine 166 mile an hour will tell you. She's got some awesome brakes, but if the track's the place you want to be, ultimately you will find the handling is a limiting factor if you want to get a move on. In terms of comfort, we're going to give the Daytona another 6 out of 10. Really, it's not all that comfortable. Now, if it were claiming to be a totally focused sports bike, we could forgive it a little more, but it's not. And a road bias sports bike should be more comfortable than this one is. Build quality, that'll be another 6 then. She's a solid old girl, and there's no doubt the Triumph's built to last, but the trade-off for that is that she is a little rough and ready in certain areas. Value for money, can you guess what we're going to give it? Yep, it's another 6. You see, at £9,500, the Daytona is roughly £1,000 more expensive than the rest of the hot poop big sports bikes around at the moment. On top of that, it's 1,700 quid more than a ZX9, which is faster, slightly better handling and more comfortable. And last but not least, what about street cred? Well, partly here, I suppose this is going to depend on how much you like talking to old men. But for me, overall, I find the bike a little too chunky, a little too clunky, and in those single tone paint schemes, it's just a little more dowdy than it needs to be. I'm going to give it 5.
I think the Triumph Daytona is probably one of the best all-round bikes for a reasonable sort of money. A little bit different if you want something that everyone else hasn't necessarily got. Triple, different type of engine configuration to most of your main line sports bikes now, I find. And an engine note to boot, plenty of grunt, fuel injected, and a good all-round handling sports bike for reasonable money.
The Triumph Daytona is another bike I'd like to see do better. Terrific horsepower, a little bit heavy to ride, little bit top heavy to ride, again personal opinion, but great horsepower all the same, good mid-range, sounds fantastic. I hope they sell more of them, like to see more of them.
It's always nice to see a British firm making good bikes, which is what they are. They're maybe a bit heavy for some people though, but you could argue that leads to better handling. I'm not so sure myself. They're reasonably priced for what they are. They've got good brakes, good performance, although there are quicker bikes out there. They're not really designed for two either, but you buy a bike for yourself really, don't you?
Right then, well that's it for this week's rooting, tooting, shooting episode of Bike File, but do join us next week when we'll have more marvellous metal for you to enjoy.